Hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Shala, I'm the Content Marketing Manager at Vidigami, and today I'm with Damon and Naz from our success team. So last month we did a bit of an overview on some of the onboarding options that are available to you this school year. We'll be doing a repeat session of that today with the team in case you missed out anything important, plus a couple of new updates in terms of integrations, etc. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the team. I'm going to start with Damon.
Thank you, Shah. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in the webinar. Some of you may know me. I am Damon Aurora. I'm part of the client success team here at Vidigami. And yeah, I'm going to be working with you today and, of course, moving forward, making sure you're all onboarded, you have all the information you need. And if you, at the end of the call, still would like to have a conversation with me, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll give the mic over to Naz for a moment so she can introduce herself, and then we'll get going.
Hi guys, I'm Naz. Some of you know me and I recognize some of your names, so it's awesome to see you on the webinar. I'm Customer Experience Manager here at Vidigami, and I'm happy to go through some of your options for onboarding this year and support you on some of the questions you may have.
All right, perfect. So before we dive into things, we want to cover a few things that will help us understand if we're ready to move forward with the new school year. So the first thing we want to make sure is that our SIS, or Student Information System, has been rolled over to the new school year. Now, this happens mostly in July and August for most schools, so there's a good possibility your school is already there. If not, we want to make sure that we over, because when we start pulling data out from there to onboard you with, we want to make sure we have the most up-to-date information in Vidigami, so there's no mix-up with people coming in and having the class of 2018 accidentally added on, but they shouldn't be there anymore. The other thing some folks ask is, hey, Damon, sometimes we have students joining our school after we set up Vidigami. So what happens in that case? Well, in those particular cases, not a problem. We can definitely onboard those individuals on a one-off basis as they come on. It's very, very simple to do in Vidigami when you do just a few people or even a handful of people. So should that happen, reach out to myself or Kalina, and we're happy to help you with it. We can even show you how you can do it yourself. It'll take just about a minute or so to add one user, and then they'll be on their way. So very simple to do, nothing to worry about there. And lastly, if you do have any other specific questions, be it about something that was discussed on this session today or something that we may not have covered, please don't hesitate to reach out to your client success specialist, and we'll go ahead and make time to chat with you about it. So with that being said, let's dive right into things. So what is new in this year? Well, we're offering you 3 different onboarding options to meet your needs. By the way, we have a website there on the slide. Feel free to check it out. We have all the information there. But as always, please don't hesitate to reach out to your CS specialist, and we can talk you through this in more detail after this call. To give you somewhat of an outline for how today's going to play out, I'm going to cover with you options 1 and options 2, and then I'll hand it over to Naz to cover the 3rd and final option. Throughout the process, no matter which option you go with, however, your CS team, our CS team is going to help you out, and we're going to make sure that you have all the guidance and assistance you need as you do the steps that are required of you. So that being said, let's dive right into option 1, and that is the CSV import, as we call it. Now, if some of you are returning schools, or maybe many of you are, this option will be somewhat familiar to you. This is what you would have started off with Vidigami. Basically, in this option, you will need to provide us a full list of every user who's going to be in the system for the 2018-2019 school year. So this includes all your staff, all the parents, and of course, all the students. Basically, anyone who needs access to the system or anyone who you would like to have tagged in the system. Now, it doesn't matter if you don't want to open the system up to your community at this point or down the road. We do always encourage that you add everyone, because it's going to help you future-proof it in the sense that should you change your mind later, or for internal purposes, if you do want to tag people, they need to be added in the system. So it's good to have that in there right from day one. So in order to go through with this step, we're going to require 2 forms from you. And I'm going to go through those forms with you right now. The first form we're going to look at is the add user list. And again, this is a sample of what that form would look like. I'm going to go through this form with you in section by section so we can spend some time talking about some of the critical components that are required. So the first one we're going to look at is first name, last name. Pretty self-explanatory here. We just let us know who the individuals are that need to be added. Nothing too complicated about this. Next up, we have emails. So with email address, this is, first of all, for any new schools out there, please keep in mind that just because we collect email addresses, we do not use this for any marketing purposes. We don't send emails out to any of your users. This is strictly in the system, so when you want to invite them, they can get the invitation. On that note, also keep in mind that when you provide this to us and when we onboard all your users, we do not automatically email them. This is a step that you will need to take once you are ready to do so. So it's kind of nice because you can get everything set up and still keep everything in sort of a lockdown mode. Should you be ready to open up to your community, we'll show you how you can invite these users, and through this email address, you'll be able to send that invitation out to them, again, when you are ready to do so. One last thing to note about the email is for students, because oftentimes young students don't have email or access to an email address, students, it is optional to have email addresses for them. However, we do require it for parents and staff. And we require a unique email address for each parent and staff member. So if you do have a family that tends to share an email address, or that's the only one you have in file, we can only technically set up one user with that email address. We encourage schools that are in this situation to reach out to those parents and ask if they have a second address they can provide for one of the individuals, and that way each user can have their own unique login. Next up, we have our user type, and there's 3 different types of users in Vidigami. The first is staff, which is going to represent all your faculty and staff members. Next up, we have students, pretty self-explanatory there. And of course, the third one is members, which is sort of a representation of your parents, as well as it can be any non-staff members or non-staff users that need access to Vidigami. So think grandparents, for example. If you have grandparents that want to see pictures of their grandchildren and you want to add them, they're not quite parents, but they are in fact a member. So we want to label them that way. Now, one thing I will mention with that is if your school has staff members that are also parents, they have students at school that are their children, you want to make sure you indicate those individuals as staff. The use case there tends to be that the students will graduate to school at some point. However, those staff members will continue or may continue to still be a staff member. So it just sets them up the right way. Next up, we have probably one of the most critical components of this form, and that is your host ID. Now, this host ID is a unique identifier that is associated with each individual. This identifier stays the same year after year and should, under no circumstances, change. Basically, this is what's going to help us identify one person from another should there be any issues with things like 2 people having the same name. You may have 2 students with the name John Smith. Because they're maybe kindergarten students, they don't have an email address. That host ID is going to help us identify which student is who. Now, this also helps us prevent duplicate accounts from happening. So if you add a student and you try to add them again, that host ID will get picked up and we'll know not to create a new account for them. This is very, very important to have, and it's a mandatory field for all users. Most schools will get this from the student information system, so you can generally export this data. Different SIS systems may have a different name for these. However, at the end of the day, the concept is the same. It's a unique identifier for each individual. And then lastly on this form, we have grad year. Now, of course, this only applies to students because parents and staff members wouldn't have a grad year. But by adding this for students, we'll know which grade to put them in and which groups in Vidigami to put them in based on those grades, be it a class of structure or a grade structure. This will allow us to know where to house those particular students. Now, there is one other thing I want to mention with this form that's not highlighted here is if you do have custom groups that you've created instead of the traditional grad groups or grad year groups or grade groups that we have, you can simply create a new column to the right here next to grad year in column G and just put in the group names for each individual that you'd like to have. And when we get that file from you, we'll take a look at that. And if you do have custom group names here, we'll go ahead and add them to Vidigami for you along with the initial groups. So that is something you can definitely do, and just send that back over to your client success specialist and we'll work with you on that. Perfect. Okay, so if you remember, we said there were 2 forms that are required for option 1. So this is the second form. This is your relationships form. Now in this form, we're going to link up the students to their parents or any members that they should be associated with in Vidigami. First and foremost, it's really important to pay attention to the column headers. So what I mean by that is, if you look at column A, we have student host ID, and in column B, we have parent host ID. It is important that we're consistent with this. So all students should be in column A and all parents should be in column B. That being said, there are no limitations with the amount of relationships you can have in Vidigami. So if we look at the next slide, we're going to see an example of one student that appears 3 times. And in column B, we can see there are 3 different parent host IDs connected to that student. So that could, in this case, be the 2 parents and maybe a step parent or a grandparent or whoever is required to connect with that student. So again, you can have that connection as many times as required, as long as those individuals are added to Vidigami in that first form. Perfect. So we're going to take a break now and see if anybody has any questions.
I'm just going to add, there's this common question that sometimes comes up from the smaller schools that they don't have any way to pull in a host ID. And if that's the case for you, as much as we try not to do this, but if there is no other option, we can use email addresses for host ID, and then you can use the next option for onboarding, which Damon's going to talk about, which is going to be rollover, so that you don't have to recall the same host ID again and again. But ideally, like Damon mentioned, we want to provide the host IDs that you can recall to reference the account. If you don't have that option at all available to you, then host ID is your best bet. I'm going to let Damon walk you over the rollover option, then you'll understand what I mean by that would be the best option combined with made up host IDs.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so that takes us to option 2, which is, as Naz mentioned, the rollover option from your previous year. Now, this option tends to sometimes be the best option for schools because it is probably going to require a little less work on your end, and you're not going to need to provide us with as much data. So first thing I want to make sure everyone knows is that this option is only available to schools that have already been onboarded once. So if you have already gone through a school year, be it just for a month or a few years, whatever the time frame you've been with us is, if you have those users in the system, we can use this option. Now, keep in mind that this is the best option if your school is set up with a grade-based group structure. So what I mean by that is when you log into your group directory, you see under your academics category something like a class of 2018, 2019, or maybe grade 10, grade 11, grade 12, and so on. If you have that type of format, we can definitely work with you on this. The way, just so you know, this works is all staff members from the previous year will roll them over to the new school year, so you're not providing us their information. Any students that you have in the system, based on the fact that we have their grad year, we're able to determine if they're going to move on to the new school year or if they've graduated, so we'll know that information as well. And of course, in Vidigami, you might be familiar, parents are always connected to their children. So if a child moves up to a new grade, by association, that parent will also get moved up to that new grade. So to do this, we're technically going to need to fill out 3 forms, but they're consisting of add and removing users. So let's take a look at the form right now. You're going to see in front of you a sample form, and the sample form is very, very similar to what you've already seen when we did the add user list earlier in the session. All of the columns have all the same things that we talked about already. We have the name, first and last, the email, which is unique to each user, the user type, host ID, and grad year. The difference is with this list, with the rollover option, we only need to receive from you a list of any new people coming into your school. So this could be all the first year students joining. This could be anybody that decides they moved into town and they want to start at your school starting from grade 4, for example. Basically anybody that's new to your school's community. There should be the students and their parents, of course, any non-staff members as well, maybe grandparents or guardians if there are any. And of course, staff members. You might have some new faculty and staff members joining your school, so we want to make sure we add them to Vidigami as well. Now, the next form that we don't have here is basically your relationships form. So much like we spent a couple minutes covering in the last option, that relationship form is where you match up the students in column A to their parents in column B. So we want to make sure that for all the new people you've added, we build that relationship in Vidigami so that when the parents log in, they see their children's content first. It prioritizes it for them. And then the last thing we're going to need to fill out is the diff list, which is also exactly the same form you see here. We'd like to keep things a little simple in the sense that we're not going to have too many forms, but very much like the format you see here, all you need to provide to us is any non-graduating student or staff members that are leaving your school at the end of that school year. So we don't need anybody that's completed their education at your school, but somebody, for example, leaves at the end of 3rd grade. We'll need to know who those students are because we have no way of knowing whether they go into the 4th grade or if they've just chosen to leave your school. And of course, the same goes for staff members. We want to make sure that we don't include them in the new year if they've decided to move on from your school. So once we receive all of these forms from you, we're going to go ahead and set you up with your new year in Vidigami. And by default, you're going to see what is considered our standard group structure. So some of you might be familiar with the standard group structure if you've gone through an onboarding process with us in the past, but we basically start you off with your internal category, which contains faculty and staff as a group, and we have your academics categories, which have the independent grade groups in there. So as you can see in the sample, grade 1, 2, 3, and so on. Now, if your setup looks a little different, or if you have more custom groups that you would like to bring over, you can certainly do so. You would just need to let us know which groups you want, and we'll go ahead and help you out by getting those groups into Vidigami for you. So the first step in doing so is actually just collecting that list of groups you currently have in the year before rolling over and letting us know which ones you want to keep. So on this next slide, I'm going to show you how you can pull that information directly out of Vidigami very, very easily. So as you can see, we are in our group directory in Vidigami, and there's a couple steps here required for you to grab that information in terms of what groups you currently have. If you look at the top right of the screen, I just want to highlight that pick the year that you want. So if you haven't rolled over yet, you should by default be 2017, 2018. However, if you prefer a 2016 year or prior, you can toggle that from here. And once you're in that appropriate year, as you can see the arrow pointing to the export group list. By clicking on this, you're going to go ahead and, you're going to receive a CSV file, and that file is going to have all the different group names that you currently have for that particular year. So now you can go into the file, delete any of the group names that you don't want there for the new year, and anything you send back to us, we'll go ahead and create that for you. So we'll do a bit of the work so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That being said, we always encourage that you start with as few groups as you need in the beginning. It helps kind of keep things a little clean. It's not as cluttered. And at the end of the day, when parents and staff and student log in, they're not going to see a whole bunch of groups that have absolutely no content in them. Creating groups are very simple in Vidigami. And if you ever need a refresher or you'd like to learn how to do that again, just that one simple step, please reach out to myself or Kalina, whoever your CSS specialist is, and we're happy to spend some time and walk you through those steps and give you a refresher if needed. But by doing so, you're going to keep it nice and clean, you're going to be ready for the new school year, and we can help you get there. Any questions on this second rollover option? One thing I'd like to quickly add is for some of you, if you're wondering, I don't know where to get some of this information, we recommend starting out by reaching out to your IT or tech team, or maybe your database manager for your student information system. We're always happy to chat with them directly as well. So should you prefer that, hey, Damon, can you speak with so-and-so on the IT team? Please connect us. I'm happy to pass on the information to them so you're easily able to get the information you need without having to do a lot of legwork if somebody else on the team can help.
Awesome. We have a question, where to get the forms from?
Good question. So we do have that onboarding page, as you may remember from that was, I believe, slide 4, about .vidigami/onboarding.com/onboarding.
Yeah.
And on there, you'll be right there, that URL. You'll be able to go in there and all the forms should be available. Of course, if you have any issues with it or are unable to find it or don't remember it, you can always reach out to either Kalina or myself, and we're happy to provide you the attachments as well.
We have another question. Can we manually remove users from the 2018-2019 school year after the rollover, or do we have to use a CSV?
We generally never recommend removing a user in Vidigami for a number of reasons. So if you are looking to delete a user, we don't want to do that because there might be data associated with the user. If you are looking to remove somebody for any reason, please reach out to myself or Kalina, and we're happy to talk about the use case with you. I think Naz may have a comment on this as well.
Yeah, let me clarify a tiny bit on that. So what Damon is talking about is not deleting a user fully from the system, that we don't recommend. But if you want to remove a user from the year 18-19, you don't have to use a CSV. You can do that manually. You can just go to the grade groups and remove that user as a member from that group. If they're not a member in that group, they're not going to have access. If they're not a member in any group in 18-19, they won't have access to 18-19 school year. They'll remain their access to the prior school years. So if that's what you want to do, you can do that. Or if you have a list, you can provide that to us and we do that for you.
We have another question. What data would I worry about for a user who has died, for instance?
That's a tough question. So if you want to maintain any information about that person, you want to keep them in the system, as in any photo that is tagged of them, any photo that they have ever uploaded to the system. If you delete that user completely from your user, that information will be completely gone and erased from the system. So any photo that they have uploaded will be loose in the system as well because it doesn't have an owner. So you kind of want to maintain their account in the system, but if you don't want them to show up in the tag list because it's too hurtful for members of your community, you can change their name, update their name to something that is not recognizable. You can call them like a star or something. So that should help with that.
Why wouldn't we simply delete a user from Vidigami?
Yeah, so again, if you delete them, all their contribution to the system will be deleted, all their tag photos will be disregarded, so the tag will be removed from the photo. So you kind of want to keep them in the system, but you can just change their name, like I mentioned, to something anonymous, so it doesn't come up in the list.
To add more to that, if you have a user who you want to cut off completely, for example, a staff member that's left, and you choose for whatever reason to not give them access, you can change their role in Vidigami to something called no access, and that's going to prevent them from getting into Vidigami again. So that way, you can still retain the content and the contribution that they have provided over the time they've used it, without letting them come in and see anything in Vidigami again. So sort of a win-win in that sense.
Yeah,
perfect.
All that said, I just want to mention again, if you can, if you really want to remove the user from the system altogether, you can just check on their account, under their profile. You can see if there are any photos that they have uploaded. The number will show up under their profile, and you can see which photos, and if there are any photos that they are tagged in. If that is 0 on both ends, you can just go ahead and remove their data, so you don't really have to maintain their account in the system. All right, that means that I'm going to talk about SIS integration, which is one of the newly added exciting features that we have for this year. Essentially, what SIS integration allows us to do is it would eliminate the need for providing any CSV or exporting any list from your system. We would create a handshake between the Vidigami system and your SIS, depending on which SIS you're using. We're currently supporting Blackbot and Veracross, and PowerSchool is coming very soon. So after the handshake is done between the two systems, we will pull in the users from your SIS into Vidigami, and we will add them to their grade groups, their class of groups. Now, in order to do this, we need to make sure that we have done a couple of validations before we do this. If you are a returning school, if you already have users in the system, we need to find a way to match up the users to what you have in your system. And if you're a new school, you don't have to worry about this. If you're a new school, and I see some of you guys on the call, just ignore me for a bit, for a couple minutes, because I'm going to talk about the stuff that are relevant to schools that do have members in the system. If you're new, all you need to do is just go through the setup with us, and we'll sync your accounts, and we will pull in all the users in the system. You don't have anything to worry about here. If you are a returning school, not that you have anything to worry about, but we need to make sure that certain steps are taken before we go ahead with the integration. One of the most important bits is validating the host IDs that are already in the system to match the host IDs or the user IDs that are in your SIS. Now, the user IDs will be called different things in different SIS systems. So in Blackbot, it's called user ID, it's labeled as user ID. In Veracross, it's called person_PK. And in PowerSchool, I'll share that information once we know more about them. We're not ready at the point, we're not yet at the point that we can share much about PowerSchool. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you go to Vidigami in your user list, the host ID that you have under each account is actually the user ID that you have for the same person in your SIS. In order to do that, if you recall what kind of ID you have provided to us through CSVs last year, then you would know if this is the same ID or not, and you can run a quick check on your system and validate that. If it's not the same, what we need to do is updating the IDs before we move ahead. So in order to update the IDs, what we need is a list from you guys to provide the previous host IDs, that the one that you provided last year, matching the new one that you can pull from your SIS system. If this is too much for you, we can talk about that separately, and we can help you. We can suggest ways to overcome the problems that you may have. Normally, if you are the platform manager or IT director in your school, you should be able to pull a list from your SIS with the old host IDs and new IDs. If your old host IDs are email addresses, you should still be able to pull the email addresses and the new IDs, so we can always update that and then move forward. Let's move on to the next key bit of information that you guys need to know. Like Damon covered in his talk about CSVs, we do collect unique emails for each member, for each account. So if you have families that are sharing an email between the two parents, if one of them are already in the system based on last year, the second one will not get pulled in because the email address is already in use. If you have new families that are sharing email addresses and none of them are in the system, the sync will not pull any of them in the system. They would need to, because the system will not know which parent to pull in for that email address. So we need to kind of make sure that that information is updated. The best way to update this is to ask your families to include a unique email address in their account. So they just have to log into your school portal and add in an email address. If that's something that you don't think is manageable, we can talk in detail and figure out the best way to proceed. But let's make sure that we talk before we go ahead with the sync. Once again, if you're a new school, don't worry about any of this, except for this one, except for the email address. So if you do not have unique email address for your families, for your accounts, we do need to go through this specific step to make sure that everybody is given a unique email. And I'm going to go through how you would get set up in a bit, but just want to make sure that we share this information ahead of time so that you can make a decision if you want to go ahead with SIS or not. Because if it's not a good match for your school, then maybe you should stick to CSVs or rollover. The reason I mentioned that is the result of the SIS sync is basically pulling all the users through Vidigami and adding them as members to our standard folder structure. So they'll be added, the parents and students will be added to grad year groups. We can rename them to grades, of course, and all the staff, all the teachers will be pulled in to a faculty and staff group. Now, if you're choosing to have a different kind of structure than this, we can definitely make that happen, but that would take away the option for resyncing the information for you. If you stick to the grade groups, if the grade groups work for you, then you don't have any problem. We can always resync information. If you have new members in your community, all you need to do is basically click on the sync button and they will be added to the system. You don't have to inform us or anything. But if you do have a different folder structure, once again, I'm going to show you this slide again. The standard group structure is the faculty, staff, and the grade groups. If you don't want this to be your folder structure and you do want to customize this, please note that you cannot sync after the initial sync that we do, which might not be a problem for you because if you only have a handful of families that are latecomers, or you want to update throughout the school year a little bit, we can do that manually. That's not a problem. It doesn't eliminate that option. We can still do that manually. But if you want to keep clicking on the sync and making sure that everything is pulled in through the SIS integration, if you go ahead with the class or some other kind of custom grouping, that would take away that option from you. If you are going with the grade groups, please make sure that you don't delete these groups, because every time you sync, the system will look for all these groups and will update the members in those groups. If the groups don't exist in the system will recreate them for you. So if you choose to delete all of those groups and go with divisions, for instance, that's okay, but then that means that you won't be able to sync again. If you want to update your list, we just have to do it manually for you as we did in prior years so far. Now let's move on. Now to get set up for a SIS integration, I'm going to start with Veracross because that's the easier one. All you need to do is you contact your Veracross rep and you ask for Vidigami install, and what they do is they install Vidigami on your system and they will provide you with API credentials, which you will then pass on to your CSS, your client success specialist, and then from there we will finalize the setup on our end, and then the sync will be ready and we'll pull in the user list into Vidigami as we discussed. Now there are no fees associated with this for Veracross because Veracross is not charging any amount for this, even though although there's a fee associated with this for Blackbaud, which is the next one that I'm going to talk about. Blackbaud, I believe they charge an annual fee of $300 for this integration. And there are a little bit of more steps involved in Blackbaud SIS integration. So the way that we start is it starts with you guys asking your client success manager for the integration. They will reach out to Blackbaud and ask for the install. Once that's done, Blackbaud normally provides us with the steps to proceed that we will pass on to you guys. Some steps that you need to perform, and you would have to have a platform manager access in your Blackbaud system to be able to do that. Now, before I get into the detail of the steps that are involved, I'm going to make a distinction between SIS integration, SIS sync, and SSO. For the SIS integration, all you need to do is you need to follow the first step of the list that I'm going to talk about in a bit, and which is basically creating an account in your SIS and assigning a certain role to it and providing that information back to your CSS. Don't worry if this is too surface level right now. I'm going to get into the details in a sec. I just want to make a distinction between the two. So with SIS, we will pull in the user list from your Blackbaud system to Vidigami. That's the step that will eliminate the onboarding. Now, SSO is basically a link, providing a link on your resource board, which would be another channel for your community to connect to Vidigami. It would basically remember each user's password on your system. It's not really true SSO. This is the limitations of the integration that we have with Blackbaud. This is what they have to offer. So what they do is basically they provide you a link on your resource board, and once the users click on that link, they would have to still put in their Vidigami password at least one time. And once they do that, the second round, the link will remember that information. If they're new to the system, if they're not activated already, they would be given the activation link and they would have to come up with a password first. And then similarly, the system will remember that link, will remember their password. And the next time they log into your school portal, they click on Vidigami, they land directly on their Vidigami account. Now, the reason why they would create the account is because Blackbaud SSO does not really support the mobile app. And in order for users to access Vidigami through mobile app, they would need to have a Vidigami account. That's why they have to create this password at this stage. Now, let's talk about the steps, the details of the steps in Blackbaud. Once again, you start with validating the host IDs against the user IDs and making sure that they do match. Failing to match the host IDs against the user IDs in your system would cause duplicated account or mismatching of the accounts, and it's really difficult to reverse that. So it's really important to take this step seriously and make sure that the matching actually happens before we proceed with the same. The second step would be to creating a user in your Blackbaud system and giving that user a Vidigami manager role. We're providing the information that you should be using, the first name, last name, and the email address and username. You can come up with whatever password you want. Once you pass this information, once you tell us that you have done this, we can then access the account and reset the password. So you don't need to share the password over email with us. And the next step would be enabling the Vidigami manager role. Now, in all transparency, I'm gonna admit that we are not experts on Blackbaud system. We can't really help with the details of how these things are done on the Blackbaud site. These are passed on to us by our Blackbaud rep. And if you have any questions on how to do any of this, it's best to contact Blackbaud directly and ask those questions in terms of how to enable SSO and how to enable the Vidigami manager role. But they have provided a video on how to do some of these steps, and we'll definitely share that with you. Now, once you have enabled the Vidigami manager role, your last step is to create the Vidigami link on your resource board. So you have a post for Vidigami on your resource board, which, as I talked about, would enable your community to access Vidigami through a new channel. Now, if you don't want to go through that, if you don't want to do the SSO, if you don't want to add the Vidigami link, all you need to do is stop at this stage. So go back to the step 2. So if you create the user and you enable the Vidigami manager role, step 3, this is enough for the SIS link. So if you don't want to move forward with the SSO, you can just stop here and just contact your client success specialist and let us know that this is done, and then we'll take it from there. If you want to go ahead and create the link, that's up to you, and you can go ahead and do that and provide your community with another channel. All right, any questions?
Looks like we don't have any questions on Blackbaud right now, but we do have a question regarding the rollover option. Just to backtrack a little bit, what do we do with the forms when completed? Do we email it to you or upload them directly to Vidigami?
You should always email it back to your client success specialist. So it could be either myself or Kalina, depending on who you work with. And what we do is, just so everyone is aware, we have an onboarding team that will review the documents and will vet it to ensure that there's no hiccups or any sort of formatting issues. And if everything looks good, we'll go ahead and import it for you. So we want to simplify the process so there's less for you to do after you've completed the data, providing us with the data rather.
Let's talk about what happens after the onboarding. I'm just going to briefly go through this. Once your onboarding is done, if you're a new school, you certainly want to book a call with your client success specialist and complete the training session. And if you're returning to school, you can always do the same and book a training session to refresh your, just to learn about the new features, or just refresh your memory on the existing ones. It's always good to do that. And we are actually looking into providing you guys with some webinars that you can join for training, and we'll share information about that later on. And then after that's done, you want to make sure that you have content uploaded to your 18-19 school year. Some of you may have already started on that, and get your staff members start tagging and making sure the content is there. When you open up the system to your community, it's engaging. There's some stuff in their landing page showing up, and there's some tag photos of them. Once you're ready to launch, and you can talk about this step in detail with your client success specialist, and they can help you through it. There are some supporting materials that we provide you. We can create adoption video for you, and we can customize it for your school. So make sure to take advantage of that. It's all free. It's just for your success. We're going to make sure that your school is successful with the launch. If you need any ideas on how to get your community involved or engaged, please do reach out to us, and we'll help with that. We can brainstorm with you and to share some of the strategies that some other schools have used and have been successful with it. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Just to repeat, you can find all the information about each of the onboarding options at about.vidigami.com/onboard. And you can even break down into the different providers that we have. We'll be updating that as we get more information. For example, for Power School, as soon as we get more information about that, you'll always be able to find it in this page. Additionally, you can always find videos, support materials, knowledge-based articles in support.vidigami to learn about how to create groups, how to add users, etc. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out to your client success specialists. And thanks for joining today's webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.